Tov. Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra Samachal, Bava Basra 61, and we're going to start on 61a at the very top. Today's daf is dedicated for Shmira for the Chayalim. That's all for the Shvuyim Yeshua for Am Yisrael and Seis Tzara. We start the new chapter, the fourth chapter of Maseches Bava Basra, which is called Hamocher Es Habayis, one who sells a house. So it says the Mishnah, somebody says, "Oh, I'm selling you my house," and he doesn't specify. Lo mochar yitzia. He has not sold his yitzia. He's not sold the yitzia. What's the yitzia? The yitzia is the annex associated with the house. The Gemara is going to say what it is. Even though the annex opens up into the house, we still say he had in mind separate thing. Now, it's hard for us to imagine this with a sale, but let's think about it as a rental. You rent a property, so you assume that he rented the annex with it. I think it's more likely there to assume you didn't rent the annex. And also not the cheder, the storage area, that is, even though it's inside the house and people have to walk through to get it, but since it's a different usage, we assume that you didn't rent it out. Not the roof, not the roof if there is a fence. Then if there's a fence that's 10 tefachim high, it's going to consider like its own space, and therefore we don't assume it's part of the house. All of these things were just in those days. Nowadays we have our own assumptions. We have a different way of doing real estate business, but this was in those days. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the fence is a tzuras Pesach, it has a door frame, then when you go into the when you walk into it, then even though it's not 10 tefachim high, it's not considered sold because we assume that it's its own space. So first the Gemara says, Ma yitzia. What does it mean? What's an annex? What is this yitzia that we're referring to? Hacha targimu afta. Here they translate it as an apta. An apta is, Rashbam says, a small structure next to the house, either on the side of it or behind it. Rav Yosef says it's a batka chalila. Rav Yosef says what it is it's also like an annex, but it has a lot of windows around it for beauty. And so therefore it's also an annex, but it's got some more aesthetic qualities to it. The one who says it's the annex, if the annex is not sold, for sure not this kind of beautiful annex next to it was not sold. The one who says it's a bidka chalila, that wasn't sold of apta, but this small annex which has no special windows, that is a mizdama that would be sold because it was assumption it was part of the house. Tani Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef taught Shalosh Shemos Yeshel. This yitzia has three names associated with it. The first name is the yitzia, the second name is the tzela, and the third name is the ta. The ta. Now we need to understand that there was a holy of holies, the temple, and around the temple they were built 3 rows of rooms on top of each other. That was called the taim, these cells, and that's where they put the money of the temple. And so there were 38 cells that were arranged according to this, and they were arranged according to a specific manner. So that's what we're referring to here. So as it states, Hayetzia Tachtona, and this first explanation comes from Malachim, and here we're explaining the first temple. The Yetzia Tachtona was Chamesh Bama Rachba. The bottom level was 5 amos wide. And so we see from here it's referring to the Yitzia is a cell that's around the temple, an annex. Cell, how do we know that a cell is also a cell, another name for Yitzia? Because it says Vatzalos Cella al Cella Shalosh Ushloshim Parmim. And it says, in this time, it's a reference to Ezekiel. And here, he's referring to the third temple. Ezekiel is predicting the third temple. The second temple is never described in the Tanakh. It's only the first temple and the third temple that are described. So the Tzelos were 33. There were these cells. There were 33 of them. And Atah Dersev. And now this is a reference also to the third temple. Kone Echad Orech, Kone Echad Rochev, Ubein Atayim Chamesh Meos. So that was a reference to these cells around the sanctuary. Alternatively, how do we know this idea? It comes from here. Kosol Hechol Sheish, Va'atah Sheish. And Kosol Atah Chamesh. The wall of the Hechol was 6, the Tah was 6, and the wall of the Tah was Chamesh. So this is another idea of that. We know that the Tah is this annex. Amar Marzutra Behuda Avi Arba Amos. He says, when is this? That which we said that if you have not sold the Yitzia, that's where it's a minimum size of 4 cubits by 4 cubits. And this is also the minimum size. You know what else it's the minimum size for? The obligation to put up a mezuzah in the room is 4 amos by 4 amos. Hold on. So what if it will be 6 by 2? That's a whole question, but we don't get into that here. So according to you, it says that unless it was 4 amos, it was sold with the Yitzia, it was sold with the house. What about the following question? El Meata Gabe Bor. Let's say we say the following law with respect to a pit. It's not Lois Abor Voas Ahadus. You haven't sold, if you sold the house, you haven't sold the pit or the cistern. Alpha Pisha Kosovo Umkavaruma, even though you said I'm selling you this house and with the depths and the heights. So if that's the case, it should also be a case with respect to the pit, that if there were 4 amos, would you say it wasn't sold? If it was less than 4 amos, it was sold. It was more, wasn't. And that we don't want to say. You really want to say a pit, if there's not 4 amos, it's not sold. And otherwise, if there's 4 amos, and if it doesn't have 4 amos, it's sold with the house. It can't be, because most pits are not 4 amos wide, because their pits are very shorter. So do you really want to say this idea that it needs 4 amos? So they're questioning Marzutra. So the Gemara says, it's not the same. It's not the same thing. When it comes to a pit and a cistern, they're very deep, and they're being used for the water. And the house is being used for a house. It's a totally different thing. And so therefore it's not included with the house, even though it's not 4 amos. But the Yitzia and the bias, the annex and the house have the same use. It's where people live. And so therefore it's included if it's not 4 amos. And that's what he said. If it's 4 amos, it's considered its own place. Otherwise, it's not. Says the Gemara, and you have not sold the room, even though it's inside, and you have to walk through it. We assume it wasn't sold because since it's not used like the house, because you just use it for storage, therefore it's not considered part of the house. And Gemara says, Hashti Yitzilum is Davim Chayder Mibai. Well, if you're not even selling the annex, which you use for living, for sure you're not selling the storage area, which you're not even using for the same use as the house. Obviously, why do we even need to say it? For on top of 61b, says the Gemara, no, we need it. We need to be taught that you're not selling the cheder in a circumstance where the afagav the meltzer, the afagav the Meitzerle Mitri Avrai. Now we needed to, for a case, even though the seller told the purchaser, I'm marking the boundaries outside the room, meaning to say that in the contract of the sale, the seller marked the borders of the house, meaning to say, for example, let's say he said, I'm selling to Ruben my house, and these are the boundaries of my house. Shimon's house is on the west, Levi's house is on the east, etc. And this room is inside those boundaries. And you could say, oh, he obviously included in. So the Tana is teaching us that he hasn't bought the room because it wasn't his intent to sell this. When he listed the boundaries, it wasn't an intent to sell the room. His intent was to just mark the known boundaries. And so therefore, he marked these boundaries, the ones that are most recognizable, even though it's not the literal boundaries of the sale. Kidder Rav Nachman, the Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravua, Amokar Bayis L'Chavero B'Bira Gedola. Let's say you sell your house, you sell basically an apartment in a large apartment building. Even though you mark the outer boundaries, it doesn't mean that you're selling all that to him. It just means Mitzarim Yerchivlo. He was just marking the known boundaries, but he doesn't mean to sell him the whole apartment building. He's just selling him the that one apartment. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. What's a scenario where Rav Nachman is teaching this law? Hechidami. If it's talking about a place where they call a apartment a bias and an apartment building a bira, Pshita, well, that's obviously the case that if he says I'm selling you a bias, he means a bias and not a bira. It means an apartment, not an apartment building. Bias is Abinway, bira is Abinway. That's obviously the case. Ella must be now where if you want to say it's still a bira, nami karwe bias, that they also call an apartment building a bias. Well, then if he says he's selling him a bias, cool is Abinway. He obviously sold him the whole building because he didn't say I'm selling you just one apartment. So the Gemara says, no, we're talking about a case, the Ruba Karle bias. Most people call it a bias. And the Ruba Karle bias. Most people call an apartment a bias. Or bira. And most people call the apartment building a bira. The Ika Nami, the bira Karle bias. And there are some people who call the apartment building a bias. Mao the Tema, you might have thought, cool is up and way. So since he says, I'm selling you this bias, that he's selling him the whole building. For the fact that he didn't say, I've left nothing over, he didn't put that clause in, below Kosev, and he didn't write that in, so he left some stuff out. So that's the whole assumption. If he really wanted to only sell that one apartment, he would have said, if he really wanted to sell the whole building, he would have said, I'm selling this building, I'm not leaving anything out. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Baravua, Mocher Sadeh Lechaver. So we have a similar case. So it says Rav Nachman in the name of Rav Baravua, someone who sells a field to his friend, the Bika Gadol, in the large plains. Even though he marked the outer boundaries of the sale, we don't assume that he's selling that all to him. He's just Mitzarim Hirchivlo. He's just marking the known boundaries, but he really doesn't mean to sell the whole plain in just one field. So the Gemara says again, what's our assumption here? Excuse me. If you call a field, and a plains, Shit, it's obvious. Southern Zaboy Bika is otherwise. It's obviously the case. If he says a Sada, he's selling him a Sada and not a Bika. The Gemara says, no, it's Tricha the Iko to a Sada, Karwe Sada, or Bika. Excuse me, skip on. Oh, the Bika number because Karwe Sada, Koizabin. So if he said that they also call a Bika field, then obviously sold them everything if he says a Sada. So the Gemara says, no, we're talking about a scenario. It's talking about a scenario, the Ika do Sada, Karwe Sada, or Bika, Nami. Excuse me. No Bika Karwe Sada. So there are some people that they call a Bika Sada. So Now the thing, he might have thought Koi Zabon. He might have said, since he said something includes all Bika Kamash Malon, we say no. Owen Kad Mikum, from the fact that he could have written, I didn't leave anything over in this sale, anything at all. So we see from here the low cost of way, and he didn't write this Shema Mina Shiri Shire, that even though he marked the boundaries as including the plains, he really only meant to sell that field. Utsricha. We need this law to be taught both by an apartment building and also by a field. V'yashmin bias, because if we just learned to buy a house and a bira by apartment and apartment building, I would say because they're both used separately. A bias is used for one apartment and a bira is used for many apartments. Because but this plains where everything is used in the same manner, they all are ready for plowing. I might have thought that he sold them everything. And if we just said the law by the plains, I would say Mishum the law Avilay Lamimsarway, because the reason why it's the case is because the seller is not able to mark the boundaries because all the fields are similar to each other. But a house, he could have marked the boundaries in the house. Then I might have thought, cool, I might have thought he sold him everything. So therefore, we need to be taught in both places. Gemara says, or like whom does it go? That which Rav Mari brought about Shmuel. Remember, we had the son of the daughter of Shmuel. Rav Mari was, Rashbam already told us this. We already had this in our Masechta, and we had this in a couple of places in the Shas, that Rav Mari was the son of Rachel, who was the daughter of Shmuel, and she was captured. And while she was in captivity, she became pregnant from her captor before he was Jewish. And then he converted, this man named Isur. And so therefore, Rav Mari was conceived without his father being Jewish, and he was born with his father being Jewish. And so therefore, he's called by his mother, Rav Mari, the son of the daughter of Shmuel. But Tosfos says, then the Yerushalmi proves that the daughter of Shmuel says that he was a full Jew, and he had perfect lineage. So it's a dispute. So Amari, the son of the daughter of Shmuel, says in the name of Abai, this person who sold something to his friend, I'm not leaving anything out. So that's Kaman, Kirav Nachman, Amar Rav Baravua. It's like Rav Nachman, name of Rabbi Baravua, who says that a seller is able to claim that he marked out wider boundaries because and the reason, and it's fine because he didn't say I didn't leave anything out, and therefore he didn't intend to include everything. That's why the sages instituted this phrase. Okay. We'll stop here, pick this up, God willing, on tomorrow's daf. This is more contract law. All righty. Shikoyach to everybody.